Happy Wednesday, y'all. Welcome back to the Graduated and Grown podcast. We are officially 2 episodes into season 3. Today's episode is episode number 25, and I have an amazing guest that simply just showed up on my For You page one day, and I hit that follow button, and now he's on the podcast. Today, we have a great episode that's focused on being a young professional in New York City, working as a consultant and building better habits. We talk about productivity. We talk about a lot of different things. And I think you guys are really going to enjoy this episode, not only because you're going to learn a lot of things, but I think Colin comes from a very relatable point of view. So, just a little bit of background. Colin is a digital strategy consultant living in New York City, the Big Apple. He's been there for around 4 years. And even though he's still so young in his career, I feel like Colin has this wisdom about him. And I think it's because from our conversation and just from what I've seen on social media, he definitely is pro networking. It seems like he talks with a lot of people. He asks questions. And it seems like he retains a lot of the wisdom that he's gained from the people that he spoke with. So anyway, that's a little bit about what he's doing right now. He's actually from Atlanta and went to the University of Georgia. And he's a huge Bulldogs fan. And I follow a couple of content creators. And I also have a friend who went to University of Georgia. And I've noticed that a lot of people say dogs instead of dogs. Have you guys noticed that from people that went to University of Georgia? Go Dogs instead of dogs. Like DAWGS. Maybe that's normal. I didn't go there. I've never been on the campus. So maybe that's what they all do. But yeah, he is a huge Bulldogs fan from Atlanta. Now he lives in New York. And like I kind of mentioned earlier, I found Colin from TikTok. So basically, I was just scrolling on my For You page and I saw this guy talking about like tracking your wins at work and using that when you are going through your annual performance review conversation, which is usually tied with a compensation conversation. I was like, this is a really good idea. I'm like, this guy looks really young. I follow quite a few people that give career advice, but normally they're like in their late 20s, like early 30s. So I'm like, this guy looks like he's the same age as me. And turns out he is a little bit older than me, but he's still a young 20 something. And basically, his TikTok content is really centered around like early career strategy. So basically, making the most out of your early 20s or making the most out of your first job or first couple of jobs. He talks a little bit about personal finance. And then he also talks about productivity. And we get into productivity and like habit building a little bit towards the end of the podcast. He actually ran a marathon in 2021. And that is honestly so unbelievable. It's not in my life plan to ever run a marathon, I don't think. But the people that train for marathons are honestly next level. And again, on his TikTok, you will see this poster board that he refers to in the podcast, which is crazy. It takes so much discipline. But yeah, guys, I really think you're going to enjoy that episode. Before we get into the episode, I just wanted to remind you guys about rating and reviewing the podcast. Like I mentioned in episode 24, thankfully, Spotify has released the functionality to actually rate podcasts now on there. So if you've listened to at least one episode, you can rate Graduated and Grown, give it 5-star ratings, and then you can leave a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. And you guys already know this. I would appreciate that so much. And you can follow us on Instagram. I say us because I feel like me and my podcast are two different things. So yeah, you can follow us on Instagram at Graduated and Grown for more content, for reels, for IGTV videos, for quotes, motivation, polls, all that great stuff. But I feel like I've said enough about the episode. Again, I think you guys are really going to enjoy it. If you are someone who is in your 20s and maybe you're interested in working as a consultant, or you're interested in the digital space, or you're looking to build better habits because it's February 9th and you still haven't worked on your New Year's goals from last month, or if you're someone who just enjoys hearing about the career pathways of people in their 20s, this is the episode for you. I think there are multiple nuggets that you're going to take away. On the Instagram page, I will post a couple of highlights and summaries of this episode, but I think it was really great. I learned a lot. Colin actually has his impact tracker on his website. He didn't really mention it in the interview. So I will have that link down below along with his social media and my social media. Again, you definitely want to follow us both. But all right, guys, sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode with Colin Rocker Rice, where we talk about, him working as a consultant, living in New York City, building better habits, and owning your career in your 20s. Here on the Graduating Girl podcast, I like to start off every episode with a couple icebreakers because I don't know you. So I think this will help me get to know you a little bit more outside of the topic that we're going to discuss today. So, my first question: what is something that you didn't realize that was expensive until you became a full-time adult?
Oh my goodness. I would have to say, without a doubt, coffee. I would say
Interesting.
I wasn't a huge drinker of it in college. And then even when you drink it in college, it's sort of easily accessible. It's either in like a student lounge or maybe it's at a club meeting, and so you're not really paying for it. But especially in New York, where a cup of coffee, I mean, I'm drinking one right now, right? This is like $7 worth of caffeine. I'm just like chugging
No
this morning. So
way.
it's, yeah, it can get expensive. So I would say coffee is definitely one of those items where it's like you don't realize it when you're a student, but once you get out here in the world, it can rack up for sure.
That is crazy. I'm not a coffee drinker, but I did not know that coffee could be $7. I mean, New York, I guess, is the most expensive city in the world, but wow.
It's wild out here. Yeah.
Okay. Well, speaking of New York, what would you say is the best and worst part about living in New York City?
Oh man, the best part, and everyone says this, but it's true, is just like the energy. I mean, there's just this like hard to calculate, just like vibe of like the streets, and when you're here and when you're at your job and talking to friends and meeting people and doing things, you just get this sense that there's just this huge scale and something is going on, and you feel like you're part of this like grand story being told in New York. And so it's a great opportunity to live out sort of every interest, every passion, every idea. Like there's a community here for you to express that, and that's really cool. The worst part, I would say, is the expensiveness, but also like kind of like the pressure. I would say that New York is
Mm,
certainly not an easy place to live, especially when you first move here. Funny story, when I got here, I vastly underestimated how much money you need to actually get into an apartment. And so for the first couple of months, I was living in an attic in Queens while I was like scraping together paychecks to put a down payment or a deposit on an apartment. So it can be a pressurized situation sometimes, but once you learn those first couple hard lessons, and you get into the city and you're living your life, it can be an incredibly beautiful, amazing place to be.
wow. And how long have you been in New York?
Just under 4 years at this
Oh,
point.
wow. Okay, so
Yeah.
you're on your way to becoming like a New York City pro. Like a couple more years and you'll like
Yeah,
know
I would
every part of
say,
the city.
yeah, absolutely. Not a newbie, but definitely not a pro. Yeah.
Okay. So if you could be an expert at any skill, what two skills would you choose?
I would say communication, and as an appendage to that, like emotional intelligence.
Mm,
I think being able to understand, read, and interact with people is kind of a superpower. At the end of the day, the
mm,
world is full of people. We interact with them every single day, and rather than any specific hard, technical skill, I think being able to effectively communicate with people, form actual relationships, being keyed in and tuned in to who they are, what they want, how how you can bring value to their lives, and vice versa, is kind of a superpower. So I would say that those two skills would be my top ones.
I definitely agree. And those are helpful both in the work environment and then in just your day to day. I love that. Really, really good idea. Speaking of your day to day, so can you tell me a little bit about yourself? Not in like an interview aspect, but like who are you? What's your background? What are you doing right now?
Sure. So I am originally from Atlanta. Went to school at the University of Georgia. Go Dogs. Moved to New York, like I said, about 4 years ago. And yeah, so I work currently as a digital strategy consultant, which basically means I help build mobile apps and websites. So we take a very user centric approach and really work with our clients to build products that are very focused around the end user who's going to be using them in the space. So not just things that look beautiful, but things that function in a really cool way as well. In addition to that, I make content on the side as a creator on TikTok, where I mostly focus on career strategy, but also do some productivity and personal finance videos as well. And In addition to that, I just ran the New York City Marathon, so that was pretty cool. But outside of that, I like to work out a couple times a week. Yeah, I think that's sort of the rundown. Yeah, that's me.
Awesome. Okay. Well, we're going to go back. We're going to start with the questions and let's go back to college. So you're from Atlanta. I love Atlanta. And you went to
Yeah.
UGA. So talk to
Yes.
me about your college experience. How was it? Why did you choose to go to UGA? And what was your major?
Sure. So when I was in high school, I would say I had two career goals. And one was I knew I wanted to work in technology because it was around that time where, these apps and startups were making increasingly like more amounts of money and it seemed like a really cool place to be. But I knew in my heart that I was not a programmer. And so I knew I wanted to work in tech, but I didn't necessarily want to code, right? Which is sort of an oxymoron until I really found a section of consulting or professional services that was centered around digital technology. So you were still in that area, right, where you're building these applications, but you're not necessarily hands on keyboard typing the lines of code. So
Hmm.
I knew I wanted to be in business, but I wanted to have a technological slant. And just looking at the options available to me, being from Atlanta, I wanted to stay in the state just from a tuition perspective. And UGA really had the best program that was, accessible to me in terms of this information systems degree. So that's sort of how I ended up at Georgia. All in all, I think the first year of college for most people is tough, and I wouldn't say I was any exception to that rule. I mean, you're obviously thrown into an environment where I went to a pretty big high school, but again, UGA was a school of 35 to 40,000 people, and so you're in a much bigger pond where everyone was class president, everyone was prom king, everyone had a 4.0, and so you really have to step your game up as well as figure out who you are, right? Because I don't know. For me, I'm certainly someone who's struggled in the past defining myself by my achievements. And so when you're in an area where everyone has those achievements, you sort of get lost in the sauce, right? And
Yeah.
so I had to really take some time and do the work on myself to figure out who I was and then build community around those parts of my personality. So I ended up joining a professional co-ed fraternity called Delta Sigma Pi, which was super awesome. I got a job at the on-campus gym, which was honestly some of my best friends came from that, and then a couple other experiences, student consulting clubs, things like that. But yeah, after building a solid community, I would say like the last 2 years were incredibly fun, incredibly exciting, and I really do like love that experience in my life.
Awesome. So, how did you go from being a college student to having your job as a consultant right now? Like when you were a senior, talk to me about the job hunt. Did you find a job? Did you have to, maybe do a gap year and, work in a different industry? Like what did your life look like senior year and then that first year post grad?
Sure. So I would say off the top, if you have the opportunity, if you're in college now, I would take as many internships as possible so you can taste a couple different things to figure out what you want to do. So for me, I had two internships in college, and so they were both in the consulting arena. So I knew that's sort of where I wanted to end up.
Hmm.
But yeah, so my senior year, to your question, I ended up getting an offer from Deloitte in consulting, and so that was super exciting. Big four consulting, big fancy title, and so I was like, okay, awesome, it's exciting. So I moved to New York, and funny enough, I start my first day, and they say, you're going to be on one of our biggest clients in the firm. Super big travel budget. Big clients, big pressure. Like you're going to love it. And I say, okay, cool. Where are we going to be going? Where are we going to be going? And they say the client's based out of Atlanta. And so I had spent all this effort, right, to get up to New York and get my apartment and like, get my first tailored suit, nice briefcase, and like live this life, and every week I just end up traveling back to my hometown. You know what I mean? So I'm still, I'm working, but it's like I didn't really get in that first year or two, I think that quintessential New York experience because I was in my apartment 2.5 days out of the week, right? Because I was on a
Wow.
Monday through Friday travel schedule. I actually was I built my apartment. Literally, it took me 6 months to get all the furniture in there because I was so wiped. After a full week of work, I just didn't want to do anything. Right. But yeah, that's sort of how I ended up in New York and how that first year or two went Deloitte.
Wow. Okay. So a couple months ago, I was on, I think I could call it like Big Four TikTok, and
Okay.
people were talking about just their experiences at like the Big Four and, higher like resignation rates and things like that. And now that's happening pretty much at every company. But like a year ago, it
Absolutely.
was like specifically with the Big Four. So Why did you leave Deloitte and go to this other company? Was it an easy decision? Was it hard?
Yeah, I think most people, when they decide to leave a job, it's either like a push or a pull. And I use that concept a lot in my life, where it's either you are being pushed out of your current role because something is happening there that you really don't agree with and you want to go do something else, or you discover something else that is just a much bigger prospect and you are pulled towards that, like intrinsically, right? So for me, I think it was a combination, a little bit of both. I would say mostly a pull. But what I essentially realized was that while I was in the technology space, I wasn't necessarily building products that I or the users loved, right? Because Deloitte
Mhm.
is it's a huge firm. They get huge contracts for huge Fortune 20 companies, right? And then the clients are all brand name. But in terms of what we're building, it's typically, large enterprise grade software, nothing that's going to really excite you, right? And I knew I wanted to build the apps that me and you use every day, right? And I want to build like next generation experiences. And I want to really be a part of something that's like cool and modern and digital. So I went intentionally to somewhere that was smaller to do that, and as well as get myself a bit more experience. At a smaller place, you have to wear, I think, more hats, so your hats are a little bigger, right? So I was able to do that as well. I think in addition, there definitely were parts of the job that weren't as glamorous as it seemed. Obviously, I switched jobs last year in the midst of the pandemic, and one
Mhm.
of my roles on my current project was I was basically the person in charge of our call it continuous delivery handover. So every night I would get on these calls at 10:30 with a team on the other side of the world to basically transfer the work over that we had done that day so they could continue
Mhm.
working. And then at 8 a.m. the next morning, they would do the same thing to me, and then we would continue in the United States. And so these calls would run from like 10:30 p.m. to like just after midnight or like 1 a.m. sometimes, just to get everything settled. And it was just like doing that day in and day out, like in the pandemic, like in, at home, like not getting any of the benefits of, right, these big four consulting jobs you hear about. So it was a combination of that really led me to leave that role.
Wow. Okay. So talk to me. How did you find this new role?
Yeah. So honestly, not too crazy of a story. I think LinkedIn is a great tool. So I hopped on there. Certainly, sometimes I will admit, even during work calls, just to see what was out there. And yeah, I applied, and I knew just off the bat, just talking to some of the people that I was interacting with in the interview process, that this would be somewhere that I really enjoy. There's definitely like an aliveness and a life and like a passion for the work they do that was really palpable there. And the team was really small, which I think
Mhm.
at the smaller levels you have to be a lot more careful about how you build culture, because it really affects you. I mean, one bad apple, if you will, can really infect a small organization, whereas at a place the size of some of these other firms, you can sort of get into the shuffle, and that person can sort of be, not so well permeated throughout the whole organization. So
Mhm.
I really like that. But yeah, just applied on LinkedIn, had a couple rounds, and then yeah, I started that job. I guess in September of last year. Yeah.
Nice, nice.
hmm
So I found that the only people that are really aware of consulting jobs tend to be people that are in the business world. So you did a really great job of explaining what consulting is and why you're interested in it. But can you tell the listeners what are the perks of being a
Yeah.
consultant? Because I think consultants have some of the best perks, in my personal opinion, just across the nation. So what are some of the perks that you've had in your
They
experiences?
They certainly can. I think it's honestly a really good point. Just to set some context, I mean, I definitely came from a background. My mom's a school teacher. My dad is a plumber. So I certainly did not come from like a white collar or a business background. And a lot of what I learned about what I do now just came from being on the job and just being exposed to. Again, it's one of the reasons why I really enjoyed college, because you're put in this environment and it's challenging, but it's also eye opening because you get to see what's out there and your perception sort of expands a bit as you learn what all these other careers are, right? But yeah, to get to your question, a consultant, right, is someone who's really you can think of a consultancy as kind of a process driven organization. One of the common critiques is like, if you're 21 or 22, what do you know about business? What do you know about my business? But I think what consulting firms do is they spend a lot of time, money, and energy coming up with frameworks or processes for how they would fix a given situation. and then they apply that to a specific industry. And so if you think about it, if you're someone who can understand and implement the framework, you don't necessarily have to have 20 years of experience in the manufacturing industry in order to make some value, right? And
Hmm.
so that's kind of the job. And when it comes to the perks, I mean, it was a pretty sweet role. I mean, at the time, I had a $200 expense budget per meal, right? Breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I was taking,
Wow.
yeah, it was pretty
What?
nice. Yeah, I was, flying in and out of Atlanta, but also places like Vegas, California, Arizona, New York, Chicago. All first class tickets. You're getting upgraded. You're accruing points based on money that you're not actually spending, which is, I think,
Wow.
super super cool. I actually I'm engaged to be married, and we actually just booked our honeymoon flight, and I was able to book that entire flight, like suite experience, going overseas to Europe, based purely on points. I think we paid like $11
Wow.
in fees or something. And so I would say the points, the travel, the expense budgets, honestly, the exposure. Again, coming from my background, being able to see like, wow, this is what a CEO looks like and what they do and where they come from, right? And seeing what some of these people in these high powered jobs that you typically wouldn't have access to, especially at my age at the time, even now, I think is really exciting and really cool.
Wow. So,
Yeah.
what is the typical career journey of a consultant? Like, do people typically stay consultants for their whole lives? Do they move into some of the companies that they've consulted for?
I think, yeah. So I think there's definitely a concept in the consulting industry of like, what's your exit op or what's your exit opportunity, right? There are certainly lifers, people who stay there, and it can be an incredibly lucrative career, but it's also incredibly high stress. I mean, you said it best. I think even before this whole period of like the Great Resignation, consulting firms and any professional services firm, considering banking as well, like has extremely high rates of turnover because the job is stressful at its core. But I think common exit opportunities. I mean, people can go to a consulting firm for a couple of years, and then absolutely they either go, as it's called, an industry. So maybe you're consulting for a Fortune 500 company like General Mills or Coca Cola. Then you get a job at that firm doing kind of a pared down version of what you were doing as a consultant, but usually for more money and less stress, which is always nice. People like to then pivot from consulting into like a highly prestigious MBA program. Like I have a good friend of mine that he was a consultant for the past 3.5 years and just got into Harvard Business School, which is pretty exciting. People pivot into tech, even people start their own businesses. So I think it's a great place to live out your career if you can handle the stress. But even if you, I won't say can't handle it, but even if you want to do something else, right? I think it's a great launching pad into a lot of other really exciting places.
Nice. So
Yeah.
you've been working for quite some time, longer than I have. So, what are some of the biggest lessons that you've learned since, starting a 9 to 5 in your life?
I think the biggest lesson that I learned early on is that no one will care about your career more than you. And so what that
Hmm.
means is I really got good early on in my career in tracking my impact, right? And I've even made some videos on this in the past where it's like you have to make sure that if you do something that's cool, right, and you get good feedback on it, especially from a client, especially from a manager, you need to make sure you're documenting that so you can then make a case for your end of year, even 6 month review. I think a lot of
Hmm.
people when they start a job, they don't realize you have review cycles that happen at least every year, but sometimes multiple times a year, where they will look and say, okay, what'd you do? Why do you deserve this job, right? Why do you deserve this raise or this promotion? And having a backlog of like things that you did, praise you received, other things that you did outside of the job, I think is super, super important. In extension to that, I would say specifically for my job and people that want to go into consulting or professional services, I think I've approached my role in like a framework of like three buckets. So there's the client service bucket, there's the firm bucket, internal bucket, and there's like the community bucket. So every year I try to do something where I need to make sure I'm obviously killing it on my client work. That's my 9 to 5. That's what I was paid and hired to do. I need to make sure I'm awesome at that. Whereas I'm also making sure that I'm doing something to help people in the firm, whether that's mentorship, whether that's opportunities for career growth, just putting together frameworks. I think another benefit of going small of going very big to very small was that I can bring some of the more thought out deliverables that the big firm had around career growth and progression to this small firm
Hmm.
to make some more to make it just a bit more obvious, because at a small firm you don't always have clear lines of succession in terms of what you should be doing to go from this level to that level. And then that last bucket around community is making sure that you're also using your role to give back to society in some way. So some ways I've done this in the past are like pro bono consulting for community organizations, doing career fairs and going into classrooms and just teaching them about my role. I think that's super, super important. Again, to what I said earlier about building the perception of what you can do once you get out of school, as well as just straight up community service. I mean, putting a shovel in the ground, building a house, doing
Hmm.
whatever you can to enrich the community around you. Um, or those is another framework, another aspect of that framework. So I would say those two things, and then the last thing is don't underestimate like the power of presence. I think we live in a great time in the world. We don't necessarily have to be somewhere physically to reap the rewards of that job or that location. But I do think, for me, I'm in the office every day at 8:15. People know my name, people know who I am and what I do and what I'm good at, and maybe what I'm not so good at. But I think a lot of my career success could be marked up to that I'm a very visible figure in any organization I'm a part of, and that sort of keeps you top of mind when these good opportunities come along and these good clients and good projects. People are going to think of you first because you are putting yourself out there in that way.
Awesome. Okay, let's rewind a little bit. So you were talking
Sure.
about like your impact tracker, and I think that might have been the video that I saw that made me go, okay, I'm gonna follow this guy. This is interesting.
It
And I
made a
had
splash.
heard
Yeah.
it did. I had heard about like basically like tracking your wins and its importance and stuff, but I didn't know about that honestly until after I went through my very first performance review
Hmm.
session with my former manager. And I'm preparing actually my conversation with my managers next week, and I have been like
Ooh.
tracking my wins and things like that. So I'm a little bit more confident going into that conversation. But tell me, like, were you in like did you learn this in college to make an impact tracker? Or is this something that you just thought of? Like, how did you come up with this idea for this document?
Yeah. So when I was in college, I was a part of a career prep organization that
Hmm.
did sort of bring up the concept with us, and they talked to us a lot about it. But honestly, in my first job, my manager was really good, honestly, and he sort of took me under his wing, and I got this apprenticeship in corporate career advancement, if you'll call it. And he really showed me the ropes, because he himself he was definitely a lifer. I mean, he started at Deloitte right out of school, and he wasn't leaving until he got partnership and then some, and so he was definitely there for the long haul. And he
Wow.
I don't know. We just got along, and he really showed me the ropes in terms of making sure that you are tracking everything you're doing for these organizations, especially feedback that comes back. Like literally taking screenshots of like emails, asking for feedback. I learned a lot of that from him. Just yeah, I guess I got lucky, right? And so I think I think that's part of why I started making content in the way I do. It's like if you get blessed in a way, it's sort of I think your obligation to share that as wide and as far as you can so other people can benefit from that knowledge as well.
Okay, nice. So at your previous job, you were having 10:30 meetings.
Yeah.
That was very, very surprising to me. So talk to me about how you have been able to maintain work-life balance, or is that not a priority right now? I know people at our age, a lot of us have like different priorities. So is that a priority for you? If so, how do you maintain it? And if it's not a priority, I would love to know why it's not a priority.
Yeah. So I see work life balance as a continuum with a little like slider, and so at certain points, I've definitely slid the rule more towards the work part when something
Mhm.
needs to get done, and I'm not doing things I need to do in my life. But sometimes it's more towards the middle, or it's maybe too much on the life part, right? Where there's something happening in my personal life or just my life outside of work that I really want to be engaged in a part of. That's taking priority over work. I would
Mhm.
say a lot of the marathon training I had to make certain decisions around, like, I'm not going to be able to get into the office as early as I can because I have to run. I'm not going to be able to work on this thing because I need to make sure I have time to recover and train and do all the sort of things that I needed to do for that event. So I think I used to beat myself up about that a little more because you hear work life balance a lot, and it's important. But I would say, every person needs to sort of find their sticking point, and then like
I agree.
their upper and lower bounds, right? So like, where do you want to be, and then you need to define like on either end like what's too much or too little. So for me, I'm a good like 9 hours a day person, but
Okay.
some people are straight 8, some people are 12 plus, right? And so it's like you got to figure out where your balance is really. Um, yeah,
Mm-hmm. Nice. Okay, so you mentioned the New York City Marathon. I follow quite a few people that did the marathon this year, and whenever I think of people that are training to do marathons, I'm like, okay, they are disciplined or they are on their way to being very, very disciplined. And I'm starting a book right now called Atomic Habits. It's pretty popular. You've probably
oh,
heard of
it's
it.
my favorite book. Yes,
It's so good. Like I'm like
so
maybe
good.
50 pages in, and
Yeah,
I'm mouth open the entire time. So, so good. And I love how he talks about basically like discipline to have habits and things like that. So, w- how did you discipline yourself to train for the New York City Marathon? How long did it take you? What steps did you take? All that stuff.
sure. So I will say just off the bat, if it weren't for that book, I probably would not have ran the New York City Marathon. I think
Mhm.
some of the concepts he talks about in that book, just the biggest one for me was like making good habits easy and bad habits hard was like super groundbreaking for me. Like I was
Mhm.
that person who, if I had a run early that morning, which when I was training, I was waking up at 5 a.m. to do these runs, I would set my
Wow.
clothes out the night before so that when I woke up, and that alarm woke me up and I wanted to go to sleep, I would see the clothes and be like, okay, no, like I've got to stick to it. Right. But I think for me, the biggest thing that helped was I'm a visual guy, and so when I got my training plan, which I trained for 20 weeks, so about 5 months for the
Wow.
marathon. Yeah. So when I first got this training plan, I bought a big piece of poster board, and I got a couple markers and a Sharpie, and I wrote down every single day from I think June to like November, like what I was going to be running or lifting or whatever every single day, and I put it on my wall, right? Big white poster board. I'd still have it actually. It's right here. And so every day, every morning when I would wake up and I would look at that board, I knew what I had to do, and I didn't, I didn't bargain with myself, right? I didn't wake up and give myself excuses or reasons why I couldn't do it. And this was through summer, this was through some holidays, and I would have to leave situations or say no to things because I knew I had to run these miles, right? I mean, a 20-mile training run, that's hours of your day that just gone, right? Because you have to train for this race. So I think making it visual, making it big was important for me because I checked it off every single day. So if I missed a day, I wouldn't be able to check it off. If I look
Mhm.
at this calendar right now, I missed one training run and I didn't check it off, and it's the only box that isn't checked off on this calendar, and it
Wow.
and it makes me angry, right? It makes me upset because I didn't get that full 100%. But it's that was a big part of it for me. And then the more I shared the event with people, it helped me stay committed because then I was committed to others, not necessarily committed to myself. Because
Mhm.
I ran with a charity called Team for Kids. I think it's the official charity for the race, and
Okay.
you have to commit to like a fundraising percentage, and so I was constantly sharing my runs on social media to get people to donate, but also to just spread the word in general. And whenever someone donated, I had at the end of the day, I had I think 30 or so friends and family donate any amount of money to help me run this race, and so I felt committed and accountable to those people. And so it
Mhm.
wasn't just like Colin has to run this race for Colin. It was I've got to do this thing for these people who believed in me enough to put dollars, towards it. So that was big for me as well.
Yeah, yeah, I think accountability definitely helps. So, are there any habits that you have that are related to your work that, have helped? I mean, obviously, if you're getting into the office every morning at 8:15, I mean, you must be an early riser.
Yeah, I think waking up early, it comes naturally to me, so I wouldn't necessarily prescribe it because I know it doesn't come naturally to all. But I would
Mhm.
say getting in. How do I say this? Getting into state has been really important for me. It's a concept that like Tony Robbins talks about a lot. And just
Okay.
like before he goes on stage for some of his like big, events, of course, if any of your listeners aren't familiar, Tony Robbins, huge, well-known, amazing, like public speaker and motivational coach, whatever. And he talks about just like these routines he goes through to prime himself to enter into a certain state. And so when I'm about to go into work, it's nothing too grand, but it's just like a mental program that I'll go through with some breathing and just like, okay, like I'm going into this environment, like I know what I have to do, like this is my job, and I'm gonna put my all into it until it's time to go. Right. I think a part of that is also why I like being in the office, because I'm associating, I think physical spaces hold energy. And so
Hmm.
if I can associate the energy of my job and the activities I do for work with that space, it helps me get into the zone. Whereas at my desk now, right, this is where I make TikToks, this is where I read, it's where I watch TV, right? So um, being able to do some stuff like that, I think is a good habit that I've developed for work.
Hmm. So we're at the end of the year, and a lot of people are, getting, well, probably not now, but in a couple weeks, people will be getting their mindset, trying to stay focused on 2022 and think about what they want to get accomplished next year. So a lot of people are going to buy habit trackers,
Yes.
habit planners. There's so many different things you can buy that are built around
Yes.
habits. But I want to know, what are some goals that you have for yourself in 2022?
Yeah. So that's a great question. I think one of the goals is to certainly be a better uh, mentor. I think I'm at that point. I'm at an interesting point in my career where it's not just like I'm judged at work now, not solely based on how well I can do my job, but how well I can set others up for success as well, right? And it's an interesting sort of paradigm shift, and I'm having to really think about and you know approach that in a new way, because we've all had bad managers and we've all had good managers, but it's like really thinking about what the good managers did that was so good and what the not so good
Hmm.
ones did that wasn't so good, so great, was interesting. And so that's definitely part of it, because some of that is, I think, and your listeners, I'm sure, will get this, but it's like when I started my job, even when I moved positions, you deal with that bit of imposter syndrome. And so now, if you're at this stage where you've already got some voices in the back of your head saying like, "Are you good enough for this role? Like, why are you here? Like, do you deserve this position?" Being able to push past that, but also be who you need to be for the people who are counting on you for some wisdom and some tips and tricks on how to get through their day and their job. So I'm thinking being a better mentor is a big one. Um, Another goal would be to get definitely back into the gym a little bit more. I think after my marathon, I definitely went on. I retired a bit essentially from physical activity, so I definitely,
Understandable.
yeah took some days off, took some vacations that were nice. But I think getting back into a good habit for that is a big one for me. And I would say another one is to really think about how I can bring uh, more value and be a better, like more nuanced voice, like in the creator space. I think when I first started making content, I was doing some coaching and like some resume reviews on the side, but I think um, where I really started to grow was when I just started to, and this sounds silly now, but it's like to put the viewer first and say like, if I wanted advice, what would I want to hear, and not necessarily putting like a paywall behind that. And so now I'm at the point where I can somewhat monetize through like brands and people who reach out to me for sponsored videos, and so I can keep the actual videos free. And so it's like I'm trying to figure out with my content now, how can I bring as much value to that space and be a unique voice, so people that aren't just looking for advice, they're looking for words of wisdom from me specifically, is a big goal of mine in the next year.
Nice. So, speaking of content creation, how often would you say that you're making a video each week?
So for me, I track it all through Notion, which I think is an amazing tool, because I've got a
Mhm.
little like Kanban project management board where I can like slide all my stuff over like as it goes through the process. But I think um, being in the mood to make content. So I take advantage of times when I'm in the mood to make content. And so
Mhm.
sometimes I will not film all week, but then like it's Thursday evening at 6:30 and I just like get a wild bug and I'll be in my room for 2 hours and make like 4 to 6 videos, right? But sometimes it's a bit more regimented. And so for me, it's like, it's trusting myself to know when I want to make content and then making it around that time. I guess at this point, I'm not as big a believer in like pushing something out every single day if I don't have something to push out, because I want to make sure that I'm protecting like my own well-being, right? And also the integrity of the videos. And I never want to come
Yeah.
off in a video as if I'm making something out of obligation. I want to be making something because I feel like I have something interesting and nuanced to say on the topic in which I'm speaking about. So if I make a bunch of videos, I'll of course spread them out, but I'm not at the point now anymore where I feel like I need to do something every single day, because again, I'm trying to be a specific voice, not necessarily just another voice in the space.
Awesome. So I'm curious, if you were to look for another job right now, do you think you would mention the fact that you have this TikTok page that has, what is it, like 60,000 followers? Do you think you would mention that, or would you want to keep that separate from like your work life?
Yeah, no one has asked me that before, but
Hmm.
thinking about it now, I'm not so sure. I think it would have to be definitely a case by case basis. I think again, the firm I work at now is very young, so there's certainly like younger people at the firm, and all of our interns for some reason know I make TikToks because I come up on their For You page. But
Hmm.
so you can't control that. But I think um for me, my job is a really great source of content for me. And so I sort of like to I think of it as a flywheel, but I definitely like it now where I keep them separate. So that what
Hmm.
I do in my job can inform the videos I make, but I don't need to necessarily, position myself as a content creator, first and foremost. So I
Uh-huh.
would say it would be tough, and it would have to be the right person in that organization. But as a rule, I'd probably say no.
Okay, gotcha. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. All right, I have a couple more questions before we get to the very end, but I want to know,
Mhm.
what is your daily routine from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to sleep on average? What does your routine look like?
Sure. So on average, now again, this is pre gym routine. So I probably get up now around 7. I'm probably out of the apartment by 7:30. Get to the office around like 8:15, and then like I said, I'm working from like 8:15 to 5:15. Right. Get home. Um, I try to set aside some time now to at least, if I'm not making content, I like to like do what I call like community engagement, right? Because I get emails all the time from people who just want advice. I get LinkedIn messages, comments, right? So even if I'm not necessarily making videos, I try to stay engaged and involved in making content ideas.
Hmm.
Um, Maybe watch some TV. Right, I'm super big into Succession right now, so
Oh,
I've been
nice.
yeah, I've been watching that a little bit. And then my fiance lives here in the city, so once a week we'll do like a date night. So we'll go out to dinner, and then I spend most of my weekends with her too, just hanging around the city. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's a not too exciting life, but I like it. New York is exciting enough, and so I'm very comfortable with like what my daily routine is. So it's good.
Nice. And
Yeah,
I feel like in New York, there's so many options. I'm sure there's never like a boring weekend. Like there's always something to do in New York. So that's awesome.
absolutely. Yeah.
So we talked about Atomic Habit. Obviously, that's a
Mhm.
recommendation. Read Atomic Habit. But other
Yes.
than that book, do you have any other book, podcast, or like newsletter suggestions for people, who are listening?
I would say specifically for me, when I was running the marathon, I listened to a lot of David Goggins. David
Okay.
Goggins, for those of you that may not know, he was a former Navy SEAL. I think he's the only member of like the special forces divisions of like I think it's like the Air Force. He's a Navy SEAL, and then he's also like a Green Beret or something, I think. But
Okay.
he's this super ultra like endurance athlete. So he does these like 100-mile races, 12-hour long races. Like he's a machine. And so to be running as much as I was running to train for the marathon, it was good to have that voice in my head of like that there's more out there. You can do this. Like just keep pushing. Keep going for it. So that was a good book. Trying to think. I've got a couple books over here. Yeah, I would say I like to read some of Tony Robbins' books as well. I think he's like a really like he's a good influence for me. He's a good he's a
Hmm.
good like role model in terms like how he can inspire people and move people past their own issues and their traumas and things that have gone wrong in their life. Um, that's a big one. I was listening to the Ed Milet podcast a lot too.
Hmm.
Ed Milet is I don't really know his background, but he's got a pretty big podcast, and he seems to get some very interesting people on it. So it's always nice for that. And then I am a Gary Vee fan, so every once in a while I will turn on some Gary Vee. Can't do
Hmm.
him at all times and all moments, but for if I'm feeling it, I'll turn him on. Get that value, and then I'll have to go do something else. But yeah,
Nice, nice. Yeah, I listen to Gary Vee a couple times a year. We keep it at that. But
yeah,
yeah, he's
exactly.
a funny guy. He's a funny
He
guy.
is. He is.
Well, Colin, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I like to end every podcast with the same question.
Okay.
What advice do you have for 20 somethings who are trying to just navigate post grad life, navigate adulting, and, really come into like their full time adult self?
Yeah, I would. So I've been thinking about this, and I think the biggest thing that I've learned is to become who you want to be. You have to be willing to let go of who you were in the past.
Okay.
And so I think for me, there are certainly parts of my personality that had just formed over time, right? And people that you may be hanging out with, even jobs that you may be involved with or working for that are part of this like old identity. But if you want to, move, and I think this is a part of our life where like so much change is happening, like 21 to 25 is so much happens there versus like say like 45 to 50, right? It's a very compressed time of a lot of change and not that many amount of years. And so a lot of people are trying to level up, to change, to become who they want to be. And I think identity is like a huge part of that. And you've got to be willing to do the work on yourself and let go of certain things and certain events and even at sometimes certain people,
Hmm.
to become the version of yourself that you want to be, because it can be tough, but from experience I can say that the alternative is much worse, and the other side is definitely greener in this case. So that would be my biggest thing, is that don't hold on to something that's holding you back if you want to go and do something else.
I love that. Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. If listeners want to follow your journey or get some tips from you on social media, where can they find you?
Sure. So I am everywhere as my full name, which is Colin Rucker Rice. That's TikTok, that's Instagram, that's Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn as Colin Rice. I promise you, if you type that into the search bar, I'm the only black guy that comes up. So you can do that. You can find me very easily. Yeah, and I'm always open to emails, messages, DMs. I answer them as often as I can. So yeah, if you want to get in touch with me, you certainly can.
Such a great episode. Thank you guys so much for listening to the entire episode. If you learned something, please let us know on social media. Follow Colin's social media, follow the Graduated and Grown social media. You can also follow my personal socials. But I genuinely feel like everyone who listened to this podcast would learn something from Colin. I found it to be really, really interesting. I feel like I learned quite a few things from his TikTok, but just talking to him and being able to ask questions that I just had just from being a 20 something that's early in my career was really, really useful. He listed quite a few like books and podcasts, and I will have all of that on the Instagram page for you guys to check out. But that is it for episode 25. Again, for season 3, we have a lot of great guests lined up, as well as some solo episodes for you guys. I will talk to you guys next week. I hope you have a great rest of your week. Keep a smile on your face. And like Colin said, to become who you want to be, you have to be willing to let go of who you were in the past, whether that's, a personality trait or letting go of certain people, certain experiences, etc. Basically, do not hold on to something that is holding you back. I think on this podcast, we are all about promotion. And when I'm talking about promotion, I'm not even talking about the sense of a job, but like self growth. That's a better word. Like, growing yourselves, becoming a better version of yourselves. And we understand that our 20s are a time to make mistakes, but I think it's also a pivotal time to grow after you make those mistakes. So yeah, remember that piece of advice. Really, really good advice. Peace out, y'all. See y'all next week. Don't forget to leave a rating and review for the podcast. Bye. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of the Graduated and Grown podcast. I appreciate you so, so much. If you haven't already, be sure to rate this podcast 5 stars and subscribe to the podcast so you can get a notification every single time a new episode is posted each week. Also, don't forget to follow our Instagram at Graduated and Grown so you can learn a little bit more about our guests, about our topics, get some resources, and provide some feedback and or episode ideas for the podcast. All right, y'all, it was your host, Ariane, and I'll talk with you all next